Over the last 75 years, biblical historians, both Christian and listen, non-Christians alike, will attest over and over again that the Bible is the most reliable document of antiquity in existence. And there's not even a close second. Here's a skeptical argument. Maybe you've heard it. I've certainly heard it over the years. It goes something like this. Listen, you can't trust the Bible, and here's why. You can't trust it because everything was written about Jesus was written hundreds of years after the events that they describe, hundreds of years after his life. So you can't really trust it. Or it was probably corrupted by the Roman Catholic Church. You know, that once they got into power, they changed a bunch of this stuff around in order to prove their points. You know, think Da Vinci Code, remember that old movie and that book by Dan Brown? You know, that's what happened. And even if it wasn't corrupted, here's a reality. No one has the originals. So, you know, we just have copies of copies of copies. So you can't trust that those copies are accurate. Maybe some of you have heard that. It seems pretty compelling, at least at first blush. In fact, I've heard comedians use this as part of their bits, saying, you know, oh, you Christians are crazy that you believe that this book can actually be trusted in its claims. What was interesting is one of my favorite Christian apologists, Wesley Huff, he was giving at Liberty University the convocation. He gave it just a couple of weeks ago, and I was watching it. And he was talking about these comedians and some of the things that they claimed. And here's what he said. I thought this was pretty clever. If you are getting your Bible history from stand-up comedians, don't be surprised if it turns out to be a joke. It's pretty good. That's pretty clever. I remember that one. Here's the truth, that all three of these claims, these critical claims about the Bible, have all been resoundingly undone and defeated. All of them. Over the last 75 years, biblical historians, both Christian and listen, non-Christians alike, will attest over and over again that the Bible is the most reliable document of antiquity in existence. And there's not even a close second. Now, why do we say that? How can that be true? Well, let me just give you three quick reasons. Number one, the dating of the New Testament. One of the key methods that historians use to consider whether writings of antiquity can be trusted is how close the writings were to the events that they describe. Does that make sense? So let me illustrate it. Let me get 4 volunteers. All right, 4 volunteers. I'm not going to ask you to say anything or do anything. Okay, just 4 volunteers. Raise your hand. Need some volunteers. Okay, come on up. Ezra, volunteer in this section. Okay, come on up. Okay, volunteer from this section. From one of these sections. Somebody, anybody? Come on up, Ryan. Of course, you're going to raise your hand. Somebody up in the balcony, volunteer. Somebody. All right, you're raising your hand. Come on down. Come down quickly. Run, but be safe. All right, thanks for coming up, everybody. Come on down. Give a hand as these guys are running through here. All right. Can each of you guys just share your name? Noah?
Ryan.
Sarah? And Ezra. Okay, so they're going to be my volunteers for this. All right, Noah?
Yep.
Come on down here, okay? You're going to be the historical figure that I'm going to talk about each time, okay? So, Alexander the Great. We all know Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great, do you know his earliest biographer that talked about his life, that wrote about his life, wrote 400 years after he lived? All right, so Ryan, come on over here. That's 400 years after he lived, okay? All right, let's use another example. Okay, how about the Hadith, which is an Islamic text that talks about the life of Muhammad and all the things that he did. And that book, the Hadith, was written within 150 to 200 years after the events of Muhammad in his life. All right, so here you're going to be 150 to 200. Oh, come over here. Stand like right here. Okay. All right, good. How about the Bible? The New Testament is written. The authors wrote about the experiences of Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, his time on earth. Let's go over here. Not 400 years, not 150 to 200 years, not even 100 years. 50 years, within 50 years of the events themselves. Get this, some of them, within 15 years of Jesus' life. Now think about this. Why would that be? Well, think about something that 1 John said. John the apostle wrote in 1 John 1:1, he said, that which was from the beginning, that which we have heard, which we've seen with our own eyes, which we've looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life, concerning Jesus Christ. What's he saying? I've been there. I walked with him. I'm writing not from a second hand, a third hand, 400 years later. I'm writing from personal eyewitness experience. That matters. Eyewitness experience matters. Can you give a hand to the people on the stage? Hey guys, you guys can go ahead and find a seat. Here's what that means. It means that the eyewitnesses who saw what Jesus did, Paul's ministry, the miracles, the growth of the church, they were still alive. Many of those eyewitnesses were still alive to verify it as well. I'll give you a local example. Raise your hand if you have been alive for 50 years or longer. Okay. Keep your hand up. Keep your hands up if you've lived in this area for 30 years or more. If you've lived in this area for 30 years or more, keep your hands up. Okay. If I said to you, you can put them down now. Thank you. If I said to you, the people that lived in this area for the last 30 years, that, you know, that company DuPont, you ever hear of them? Here in Wilmington. If I said to you, you know, back in the 1990s, there's this rumor that they laid off a bunch of people. That never happened. That was a myth. People made that up to discredit the company. That never happened. Those of you that had your hand up, what would you say? That's false. Why? Well, you're probably going to say something like, I was an employee there. I remember it. I got laid off. Or I was one of the decision makers and I had to make some tough decisions. Or I was part of the family members who were impacted by that. I remember the events of the community and what happened when all these layers of layoffs took place and what that did. You remember those events because you were eyewitnesses. So if somebody came along and said something, you'd be saying, that's not true. Eyewitness matters. That is the power of credibility, the accuracy of the eyewitness, the dating of the New Testament. Here's the second. The abundance of ancient manuscripts. We have all of these manuscripts from all over the Greco-Roman world. When you look at all of them, all of these manuscripts together, you can piece them together and see how accurate it is. Do they all say the same thing, or do they say something totally different? This is really important because the more copies you have, the more you can compare those copies and get a sense of its accuracy. So remember Alexander the Great? Guess what? Alexander the Great's earliest biography, we only have 8 copies of that biography. 8 copies that were written 400 years and later. 400 years ago and later, okay? 8 copies. Compare that to the Bible. We have 25,000 ancient copies of the New Testament. Just of the New Testament. 25,000 copies. 8, Alexander the Great, and 25,000 copies. This is an abundance. It's what one scholar calls an embarrassment of riches, the number of ancient manuscripts we have. The New Testament is in its own category when it comes to reliability. And then that leads us briefly to the third reason for its credibility. Its accuracy of its ancient manuscripts. Its accuracy. What do I mean by that? Due to these massive number of manuscripts and their dating, scholars can reconstruct the New Testament using all of these manuscripts and see how congruent it is. And you know what they found? It's 99% accurate. 99% congruent, which means it's the version that we have in the Bible, 99% accuracy to the ones that were written 2,000 years ago. No other ancient book can even come close to that. The closest is the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, which has 5% textual uncertainty. The Bible only has less than 1% textual uncertainty. And even in that 1%, most of them are spelling errors or word choice, changes. None of them are about key doctrines. And here's just what all of this means. It really crushes these 3 myths. It crushes the myth that the Bible was changed by, the people in power. It crushes the myth that it was written much later or it might not be accurate. As Dr. James White said, there's never been a time when a man or a woman or a group of men had control over a text of the New Testament. All assertions like adding doctrine, changing theology, removing teachings are without merit. The Christian church was a persecuted minority without power to enforce a uniform textual transmission, which just is another way of saying, hey, that power theory, about the corrupt people in power doesn't work when it comes to the Bible.